Hello everybody, Fred Reep. We're back here in the JConcepts garage, kind of a little two-part video we're doing. We assembled the regulator chassis in our first little section, and now we're going on to the behind the axle steering, the B.A.S steering setup, and the rear steering lockout. So again, thanks guys for joining, and let's get into this thing. Alright, so some of you guys had some questions, and have been emailing us and about the rear behind the axle steering. Pretty much a cut and dry setup. It's a really cool idea. Jason Rona, we been racing these things around, and you had the steering out in front, and then hit a Odyssey battery in a race and kind of wiped out his whole steering setup. So he kind of came up with the idea, Fred, let's kind of look at this thing and come up and hide the steering behind the axle. And it was a tough task because there's not a lot of room going on in there, and just for instructional video purposes, we have taken the gearbox out of the truck and we have removed the motor, just so it's easier for the camera and you guys to visually see what's going on in here. But before we get to this, let's go ahead and start the basic build setup for this behind the axle steering. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the top servo brace here, and we're going to attach the legs. And we're going to attach the legs with a 4 of the M3 by 5 millimeter button head screws. Again, loosely. Never go ahead and torque everything down when you're assembling something. Kind of assemble it loosely. That way you make sure all your screws go in. You take a lot of the risk of cross-threading things out when you build it loosely. So we got both of them started. And I'm going to go back and torque them down. Again, you're threading into aluminum. No need to get crazy on wrenching it down, because you can strip this stuff. And one leg. Okay, there we go. We have both legs now attached to the servo mount. And now, in the instructions, you can either go ahead and mount this up and then slip the servo down. If you don't have the room, or it's a little tight for you, we can go ahead and assemble this outside of that. And then, if you could remove them, you have the option to remove the motor. Just gives you a little more working room inside. But the way we design this thing, it should be able to just slip down inside, with your servo on there. But for now, we'll just we'll build it outside, so it's easier for you guys to see. So here it's kind of, when you're doing this stuff, you want to have your servo all self-centered already. Hook it all up, find the center on it. Here, kind of skipping a step a little bit here. I just want to show you as we're assembling this. We have the new JConcepts 2852. For the reedy servo. Some other servos, they have different splines, but this one here's a 25 tooth, 18 millimeters in length is what we need for this build to get the correct throw. So just a little quick note on, as I'm doing this here, show that to you. So we have the servo installed in the mount now, utilizing the 4 M3 by 6 millimeter button head screws and M3 flat washers. As you can see here, we got the Servo Horn on there, looking really good. And now what we're going to do is we're going to mount it to the upper strut on the Clod Buster axle. As you can see here, we have this one already mounted on here, but for instructional purposes, I kind of broke down some of the parts. That way it's kind of easier for you guys to see on the camera. So this is your mount here. We'll just mirror kind of what's happening on the truck. Very simple. The little bosses, they'll slip right down and engage in the arm. And then we have the special nut down here that also interlocks on the other side Again, a lot going on in a small space, so forgive my fingers if they get in the way. But you can see everything just interlocks. And then we have an interlocking nut that goes on the underside. And then we're going to use the two M3 by 8mm button head screws to fasten that. And here's where you're going to want to use that Loctite or Vibrotite again to help secure the screws. Okay, don't go crazy on the torque again. And it's just that easy. So we have here mirrored in the truck. You can see that there. And again, it's your choice. You could assemble all this and then slip it down in there, or take the motor out and do just like what we did here, and it's a little easier to work with. But that's basically the upper mount and getting your servo in there, looking really good. Now we're going to do the ball stud for the steering on your servo horn. It's the 5.5mm by 6mm ball stud. You're also going to want to use some thread locker on this guy. And there we have it. Well, we'll set this off to the side. Look in here, see what it's looking like in the truck. All right, now we're going to make the little steering arm that's going to connect the servo to the center linkage. Going to use the little ball cups here and set screw. Again, very simple. I got to just kind of eye this up. You can also use another tool there to hold the ball cup as you. And then we're going to set this to 2.91mm in between these ball cups. So go ahead and get this one screwed down. Should be close enough there. Yep. Okay, we've got our linkage there made. We're going to take our linkage, snap it on to our servo horn. Just really easy. A little muscle. Get it on there. Now I've already done this, but on your Clod Buster, normally your axles and all your steering components are on the front side. So what I did was I took these knuckles, took them off, and I actually trimmed the ears off. There's some locking points that are on the stock Clod Buster which limit the throw of your steering. So I took these knuckles off, trimmed those down, and I rotated them 180 degrees. And what that's doing is it's lowering this arm here on the knuckle, so we have some more clearance for the steering throw. So we removed the ears, upper and lower, both sides, took the knuckles off and rotated them 180 degrees and reassembled. I guess another good point to add while we're here is if you're wanting to use the front wheel steering only, it kind of makes a truck a lot more stable in a race situation. To get a little more throw out of the steering, We've actually made a couple little modifications here to the stock link bars. As you can see here, all we did was take a Dremel and just ever so slightly go in and grind down up in here on the front of the arm, and just gives us a bit more clearance here. You just want the tire just to barely rub up against this arm, and then set your end point on your steering to pull it away. So if you have a little more and it's rubbing, just readjust your end points in your radio, and then you'll have really good front steering geometry. So just a little grinding here, a little grinding on the back side, and then I did a little bit of trimming here on the arm itself, on the knuckle. So that's going to give us plenty of room and clearance for the steering throw. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to install the screws here for the arms, so we can put our steering together, our steering rack. So we're going to take our two M3 by 15 button head screws and just slip them down here on the arm, on the knuckle. M3 plain nut. It's really nice on these Tamiya knuckles here is that they have an interlock, so one side's really easy as far as torquing the screw down because it'll hold the nut. The other side, a little more trick to it, because here you had your brass standoff, which we're not using anymore. So you can see that can move around, but we have our nut driver. It's just enough to grab it and help hold it when we put the screw in. Just enough there for my nut driver to grab onto that nut, or you can torque this guy down just right. Boom. All right, screws are installed there on the knuckles. Okay, now we'll put our ball stud on our steering rack. Okay, put our top hat bushings over here. This is going to give our proper bearing clearance. Take our flanged bearings, just pop them in the rack. This will slide right over, like so. Nylon lock nuts. Now this should hold, but if you have to or want more confidence, you can always back this up and put your 2mm in there to give a little more torque on there, but it should be all right. It's meant, now that you have a stud on it, you can just screw the nut right down and no problems. working really good. Snap our linkage on. There you have it. The steering in, ready to go. And now we'll cut back over to the truck and show you it all installed together. All right, one of the last things I want to cover here is the rear steering lockout, the RSL. Basically what you're going to do is the same thing as the front, is by rotating the knuckle 180 degrees. You want to change the elevation of the arm on the knuckle. So you change that. What you don't have to do is you don't have to remove the ears. So it's nice here, as you can see the stock ears, you know, it limits the rotation of the steering knuckle. And as you can see here on the front, this is one that's been modified so you can get more steering clearance out of it. All right, so now for the rear steering lockout, pretty simple. All I did was I already installed the M3 by 12 millimeter button head screws through the arm on the knuckle, as you can see here. And all we're going to do is slip the lockout right over it. You just have to push it down with your fingers. Not a lot of stress on these parts. Kind of fit right down nice and snug. Then your lock nuts. Okay, we have our front steering installed and the rear steering lockout installed. So looking very good, nice and clean. Bolt some tires on it and we're ready to go racing. Well, that's a wrap for steering and rear steering lockout. And most importantly, I put Jason's truck back together, so he's going to be thrilled to death. Brand new JConcepts body on here. So thanks again for tuning in, and I hope this answered a bunch of your questions on our steering setup, and we'll see you next time here in the JConcepts garage.